Hey, Gary here. Welcome to Book Mob episode 43. Today's episode, I'm going to be talking about Ken Follett's Century series, which is a trilogy well written, beautifully written, about the history of the 20th century. Now, he covers, the Bolshevik Revolution, the First World War, the Depression, the Second World War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the fall of the Berlin Wall. And in his story, in his narrative, he tries to give the reader an understanding of history of the 100 years of the 20th century. And he gives you, through each volume, a family, an individual, an experience that allows you to see how history affects individuals and how their circumstances change, how they rise to the challenge of new governments, the destruction of the old ways of life. He confronts the palpable sort of outcomes of communism, democracy, and at the end of the day, I wouldn't call it a superficial history, because he goes and he does demonstrate that in each major cataclysmic change in history, that there are individuals involved who make or break whatever civilized decisions they make that will affect every member of the population. The First World War is kind of seen as a war of empires, where millions upon millions of individuals were sacrificed for the ego or for the, basically young men and some women died for the royal sort of idea of a family that controls certain areas of the world. So young people just simply knew their duty, put their hand up and found themselves in trenches, and mostly found themselves blown apart by the munitions that individuals made a lot of money from. And hence, through the first volume of the series, Fall of Giants, it's about it's about the Russian Revolution, the introduction of the communist government, how communism came into being through the torturous and ugly effects of the Tsarist regime. So they swap, and through communism, you see how they simply swapped one regime for another. Because millions died under communism, and as the Tsarists and as the Tsar would proclaim this is the truth, the communists did the same. They say, this is the truth, you don't follow the truth, you're out of here. And hence the gulags, the famines, the whole breakdown of a consumer society that cannot move forward, because the bureaucracy of the communist state basically makes sure that no one rises above the water unless you're part of the elite, which is held atop. And that's come through very strongly. And in the same sense, the writer Ken Follett crosses the world, and we have the displays of England and America. England as a sort of colonial master that is crumbling at the time, where servants and serfs are beholden to the lords of the land, even up until the 20th century. The idea that class and position was a birthright, and if you showed any kind of promise as a person, it made no difference because you did not come from a certain class. So the whole book is this tyranny, this antagonistic behavior and actions of individuals in a Welsh mining town who are trying to get out of the clutch of the feudalist ideas that seem to run the United Kingdom for many, many centuries. Now, Follett takes families in America, England and Wales and Russia, and he produces a lifelong experience. So you get to read about the grandfathers as young men and the grandmothers as young women. You read about them getting married. You read about their tragedies, their family tragedies, and how each family, how each group sort of moved through the tumultuous sort of events of the 20th century. And it's a page-turning book, but you really got to stick with it. And the 3 volumes are about, I don't know how many, nearly 4,000 pages of fiction. And I chose to read it, each volume, 1, 2, and 3. I chose to read each volume one per week. So after 3 weeks, I'd finished the series, and I tried to remember where I came in at the beginning, in the basically the start of the century, the First World War, and the Depression, and how you see how Ken Follett basically gives you a pop culture view of how the world moved from Europe to America, and how money and invention and the sort of unscrupulous behavior of individuals on all the fronts of life changed the world each and every day. Also, the one thing I find out with Ken Follett, well, particularly in the Century Trilogy, is that each is so, all the characters are extremely sexual. So there's a lot of this sort of sexual activity between characters that binds them to future narratives in the coming years as he describes them. So, and he's not shy, he doesn't shy away from using, words like cocksucking and cunt licking, and he really goes to town with bawdy type language. And it seems, when you read the book, it seems out of place, because he's literally, every character has a sexual relationship with an antagonistic character. He talks about homosexuality, but however, he doesn't actually talk about homosexual sex. All his sex in the book is from men and women together, passion, lust, poetry, words, desire. And I found, I guess, when I think about it, because he's writing about human beings, about people, and and I know, everyone knows that people fall in love, people fall in lust. So I guess he's trying to put that special, intimate, private moments into the juggernaut of history that basically runs all of our lives. And if one thing comes out from reading these 3,500 words or whatever, is that history is almost separate. It's a separate being from the individuals. We're all here like ants doing our business, getting on with our lives, whereas history overshadows everything, and occasionally you'll have major events that affect everyone, like the First World War, like the Depression, the Second World War, and to some extent the Cuban Missile Crisis. And from reading Follett's Century Trilogy, he doesn't seem to understand that so many people came this close to being erratic, blown apart by atomic bombs or in a global scale. However, again, I think that he understands history. Obviously, he's a student of history. Obviously, he understands the movement of historical moments like communism, militarism, nationalism, socialism, and he brings all of this together in these three magnificent books. Now, is it easy to recommend reading these books to its fullest extent, meaning that you take the challenge of reading volume 1, 2, and 3? I don't know. I didn't struggle with the narrative. I found it quite easy to read. Language is simple. I wouldn't essentially say it's a critical page turner, but it does have that element of soap opera that seems to work on people's desire to see what happens next. Who's going to die? Who's going to be fucking? Who's going to be the boss? Who's going to win or who's going to lose? All those, human traits captured using history, the 20th century, as a backdrop for the human, natural, normal human behavior. And some of the scenes, especially in the second volume, which is called Winter of the World, the rise of Nazism in Germany basically from the 1933 to 1945, when the Nazis and Hitler had held absolute power. And he describes individuals who are accepting, individuals who are loving the fact that that Hitler came to power, and also the very small minority of people who fought against the Nazis within Germany. You don't see much of that. There were people who did indeed try to usurp the Nazi regime within Germany, and most of those unfortunate people were murdered by the Nazis. And there's one family that lives within the Nazi Germany, and they try to help the Allies. And then again, you have the communists from the East who have spies within Berlin, and it's this horrible tangle of relationships, secrecy, and ultimately the end of the Nazi era simply produced another era, which lasted over 70 years, where people were maligned, imprisoned, sent to gulags, murdered, all in the name of ideology. And in this sense, Ken Follett is talking about communism. And he moves through communism from 1917 at the revolution all the way to 1990 when the wall came down in Berlin. I don't know if you know, there used to be Berlin was split into West and East Berlin with a wall in between, surrounded by German, communist German, and in the sense that Berlin was a center of democratic thought, ideas, art, and all throughout the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and up into the 90s, thousands and thousands of East Berliners tried to escape into West Berlin. Many lost their lives. So he really tackles that issue with the secret police, the Stasi, and again, he's mixing in normal people, regular Joes who have partnerships, friendships, relationships, marriages, children. So I think that Ken Follett has successfully produced a beautiful narrative of 20th century history. And in that, there is countless characters who have to deal with each and every day the effects and the outcomes of political and social decisions that they have no choice in. So if you're willing to look back at 100 years of human history, Ken Follett's Century series is certainly a good read. Now, it's not a concise history, it's a history of people within the history of events, politics, and outcomes of wars, depressions, advances in technology. So it is a soap opera in some respects, and as soap operas have been a very, very popular form of fiction over the decades, I think he succeeds in creating what I could call an upper class soap opera. And it's worth reading, but again, if you start the first volume, it does kind of behove you to say, okay, I'm going to go through 1, 2, and 3 in order to get the full impact and the full joy of Ken Follett's Century Trilogy. And we start with Fall of Giants, First World War, the Winter of the World, goes up to the Second World War, and the final version, Edge of Eternity, which goes into the 1960s with American politics. So you have a cohesive history in a narrative, enjoyable, entertaining form. Okay, so thanks for watching. I'm glad I'm finished with that series because it was quite a task. And at the end of the day, is it good reading? Yes. Is it fun to read? Yes. Is it entertaining? Yes. Does it require discipline and time? Yes. So you make your mind up. All right. Thank you for tuning in, and maybe you'll see me on the next episode of Book Mob. And thanks for coming. And if you like, subscribe and like and ask any questions. Goodbye.